Buddy, I'm going to walk you through my basic process for making a composite. I'm a little bit lazy in terms of learning really complex cutting out techniques. If you want more stuff on that, go to flern.com. Aaron Nays is a master at doing composite stuff, so he can help you out. This is just the way I do it because I'd rather just get it done. Usually when I'm working on compositing, I have something that I need to make done, and I just want to use what I have. So this is the image that I'm going to try and recreate. I made this 2 years ago as a Reed poster, and it uses two Photoshop, photos, and then I'm just putting them together. If you're watching this for Digital Photography Advanced, then the background picture would be something that you would draw or you would get a friend to draw. So let's get into Photoshop and we'll take a look at the two things and how I did it. So I have my two photos over here. This is the background image that I shot with my Nikon camera and a big softbox. You can see there's some fairly soft shadows, but they're angled this way, right along where my mouse is kind of pointing there. So the camera is coming from over here and pointing, the light's coming from over there and pointing down across it. So the first thing I had to do is when shooting my picture, I had to make sure that the light was doing the same thing for them. So I used the exact same light, actually, and you can see it in the reflection in the window there. And I just pulled it back and I angled it down, shooting across them. If you look, I had them in the final image on either side of this Silmarillion book, which sticks out from the other ones. So then that's why I took this file cabinet here and I said, all right, stand on other sides of it and kind of reach around like, hey, come into the bookshelf and hang out with me. Because that's kind of the story. It's like, hey, let's go on an adventure with the books, right? That was at least my idea. So I used that there to make it look a little bit more real. Is enough. I'm not going to use this in the final shot, obviously, but it does create a bit more shadow on her leg, and it gives them something to reach around. The more I do these kind of things, the more I realize that having those kind of props there makes it a lot easier to do the composite. Putting two things together is a lot of the job is done for you if you can. If they're doing the whole thing full out. If the light is right and the pose is right, you don't have to fake it in Photoshop. The less you have to fake it, the easier it's going to be. So first thing we need to do to get to start cutting this out, to stick it on the other layer, is we're going to make a duplicate layer. And you can right click on it and hit duplicate layer or Command J. Let's just call this cutout. And I'm going to make this layer invisible. So now, most of what I'm going to do is going to be just basic masking. So first I'm going to make a simple selection using the quick select tool. And that's not going to be super accurate, but it's going to get some of the heavy lifting done. So I don't have to worry about making it a perfect thing because I'm going to go in with a brush and a mask in a little bit. And with this kind of a background, since I didn't shoot it like with my white backdrop, it's a little bit trickier finding how to get there's not as much contrast between them and the background as there is. So right now if I look up here, I'm at the plus, I can add to the selection, so I'm going to take a little bit of a shoe and add that in. I don't want these shadows back there, so I'm going to switch to minus, so that's going to subtract from my selection. We'll go right up there. And so it's just looking for contrast, basically. Things that stick out. That's pretty good. We'll get rid of that little bit there. And then we'll go back to plus. What did I lose? A bit of her shoe. It was something I just saw that I lost. A little bit of Libby's head there. And then we'll subtract a little bit more. Oh yeah, let's get rid of this area in here. And then I gotta add her leg back in. So it's kind of a pain, but you'll see why it's better in the long run. All right, good enough. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna hit this little mask button right down here in the bottom right corner. And what that does is it makes a mask based on the selection I made. So all the black is stuff that we don't see, and the white is stuff that we do see. So now what I need to do is I need to refine that. And you can go into refining your mask and stuff like that. But for the most part, I just find it's just as easy to go in with a paintbrush. Let's change my workspace here. I have one set up for my monitor. And we'll start with a hard brush. And I'm using my Wacom's Intuos stylus, a medium, and that just makes it a lot easier to do cutting. Checking my opacity and my flows at 100% because I just want to make sure I cut everything out right now. And I'll do a couple of parts really close, but just for the speed of the video, I'm not going to do all of it because that would take forever. So we'll just go along some of these borders here. And the nice thing about having a mask is that if you accidentally, do too much, you can start to paint it back in. So you're just switching between black and white. And right here I've got my foreground and background colors. I've got a button set on my stylus so that when I click it, it switches between white and black. You can also do that by hitting X, which switches between those two things. If your background and foreground switch from something that's not black and white, you can hit D to change back to your default colors, which will be pure black and white. So some of the bookshelf is in here. We'll just get rid of that. What I've also found is when I'm going to do a composite like this, a lot of times things that look like they're really important when you're doing it against this kind of, a pure transparent background become not as big a deal when you bring them into the actual picture that you're bringing in. So I'll do most of the cutting here, and then I will clean that up once I get it into the picture that I'm adding it to. There's some weird guys there. And sometimes for a trickier kind of area, I might switch to a softer brush, which has just an edge that's a little easier. So this, wrong color. Let's paint that back with white. And there's some more of her head there. And I'm not going to worry a whole lot about what's going on. Oh, there's yeah. So it's just kind of cleaning up the selection there. Nobody's ever going to look at your picture this big. Like this is for a 20 by 30 inch print is what I had planned there. So yeah, let's switch to a softer brush. Soft round pressure opacity. That means that the harder I push, the more opaque it is. But I can kind of go right from the edge of it and start to feather that out a little bit. So some things you want a really hard edge, some things you want it to be a little smoother. And like, too much. So undo that. Let's set my opacity. I just hit 5 to switch to 50% opacity. So in addition to not really hitting very hard, you can also that looks like garbage. I'll see whether that lines up well in the final thing. Don't kill yourself until you see how it goes in. We'll go back to full opacity. I'll go back to my hard round. You get just a sense of my basic procedure here. Got the actual books right behind them. So real compositors would be laughing at my approach right now. They're like, oh, you're wasting so much time. You can have it just set, put your tolerances and stuff. And, but that's not, it's not my job 100% of the time. So I haven't become like an expert on that. There's nothing really wrong with this approach other than it takes longer. So I don't know what those dots are. Are they part of her pants or not? Let's clean this one. We'll just clean up the side of her leg and then we'll be done. We'll bring it over to the other document. And if you get, I get the point, just fast forward a little bit to see me duplicating layers. So right there, it's an obvious circle from the size of my brush. See that right there? So I'm gonna fix that up in a sec. Paint it back in. Maybe a smaller brush. That's pretty good. Oh, that's what I had. That's the thing I was like, we're gonna fix that. All right. This kind of thing right here, this line, That's something I definitely don't want to leave because I might not notice that when I'm working. And then once the print is up, then I start seeing those things and I'm like, oh, I hate myself because I missed that. So you just put your shoe right back in there, clean up this part of the shoe. You can reshape. Sometimes you can like change the essential shape of something just by masking out what you show. Again, I get kind of OCD about it when I'm doing it, and I have to keep telling myself this is not the main goal. Get there, fix it when you're there. But there we go. That's what she does. The details do that. Okay, so I'm going to zoom it out, and I'll assume I'm going to fix the mask later on. So what I'm going to do is now I'm going to go to Window, Arrange, Tile All vertically. And what that does is it gives me both the images that I'm working on. And this layer here, I'm just going to drag this layer into this document. And then boom, they're there. And I'm going to close this one out. I don't need to save it. I've already got the layer that I'm working with. So now I'm going to hit V to switch to my Move tool. That's also this guy right here. And this layer, I can move around. So let's try and line them up kind of where they're supposed to be. They're a little bit big now, I think. So I'm going to resize. Depending on which version of Photoshop you're using, it may default, like the most recent one defaults to resizing proportionately. In older versions of Photoshop, you have to hit Shift to make sure that you're not stretching things out weird. So the new versions, you hit Shift and that lets you stretch it out weird. The old versions, you hit Shift and you avoid stretching it out. I prefer the new version because I almost never want to like screw up my proportions. What I'm trying to do is find some balance between having her foot not going off the edge and still being around the book. Fitting in the space. That's pretty solid there. Okay, so I'm going to hit the check mark to apply that. And then I'll go in, I'll clean up a little bit more of the mask. See, the mask is still there because the layer copied over with the mask. B for my brush. I'm still using my hard one. And sometimes you don't want the edge super hard because like it wasn't that hard in real life. Like it looks overly composite-y. So like using, if you go up to your brush adjustments here, if you drop your hardness down to like 66%, that's going to make the edge a little bit softer. I'll just click in, switching back to white. I feel like yep, there's some missing leg there. Where does it end? Okay, that's more realistic. Just switching back and forth between my colors and clicking that little button on my Intuos pen. This is looking pretty good. The nice thing about putting these two together is I shot them in the exact same room with the exact same light at the exact same brightness. So that makes what about this word I'm looking for? That means that it's morning. It makes merging the two a little bit more seamless. If you hadn't done that, so like, say the picture is like a sunset picture, but you shot it with regular white lights, then what you would want to do is start adding adjustment layers once this is in and clipping them to the mask. And I'll show you how to do that a little bit in just a second. So clean that up. And basically that's the other two things that I'll show you is how to add those adjustment layers for really matching, and then a little bit about how to add some shadows back in because they had shadows on the floor. And with this kind of strong light, directional light, a little bit of the shadow there, they need their shadows to be casting in this picture or else it doesn't look real. So it's all these things like you're kind of just painting your own picture but using tools that aren't paint. You know, so all right. In this one there's some kind of like weird and if your brush isn't exactly the right shape, I do that kind of back and forth where I take a little bit out and then I paint it back in to make things line up. And I'm going to switch to soft pressure opacity, nice small soft brush, and just lightly paint out some of this stuff. What I really don't want is that those bright fringes there to make it obvious that the hair was shot against something. Like the background is brighter in her picture than it is in the composite. So we got to clean up those edges, those kind of fringy things. That's why I'm using the pressure opacity, because I can push harder if I need to dig a little bit more out. And it's not always necessary to get everything that was in the original picture across. It just needs to look natural. I'm just kind of doing a little bit of this. And I know I said I'd get to the other stuff, but I think this is actually kind of valuable to see. Just cleaning up those edges. And then thinking about like, how much would that single hair show up against this background? Like maybe it doesn't need to be quite as opaque. Just a little bit of a hint of it going in there. That's why I sort of like doing it this way, because as long as you're willing to take the time. I mean, I'm too lazy to learn in the other way. But as long as you're willing to take the time, you can really control every pixel of how your piece goes into the other one. And I don't do this full time, so I'm not churning out high volumes. I get a $300 budget every year to print read posters. And usually I have more posters than I can print, so I'm all good there. Like a lot of this would just blend in. Oops. Getting lazy. All right, so that's a good sign that it's time for me to move on. Like obviously, this purple stuff that needs to go. There's stuff around Libby's foot that needs to go, but you get the basic idea of how this works. All right, so now let's say that you want more of a golden light on them. Like their color is off. What I'm going to do is, let's say, or you want to increase the contrast on them, but you don't want to do it to the background. Let's do a color balance. So if I crank this over to yellow and then I add maybe some red, this is a little bit more of that kind of orangey light. Now it's now applying to everything because it's on the top layer. If I hit this little clipping button, what it's going to do is it's going to clip it to just this layer here. So, and you can see that with the little thing there. And now I can add another adjustment. That brightened it up a little bit, so maybe I'll do a little curves adjustment. I'll clip that as well to just this layer with this button here, and bring that down. A little bit more contrast. Maybe we'll boost this. Something like, yeah, that looks awful. I'll get rid of that point. I don't know this one. Okay. None of this is necessary though, because the color balance and the light was actually fairly well matched just by shooting it. It looks better like that. Like they're lined up. But like I said, you might have a different thing going on where you need to tweak it. When I made my Avengers poster with I had to do lots of color adjustment to each layer to go in. So let's look at how to make the shadow layer. I'm going to hit new layer down here. You can hit this little button here, or you can go to layer, new layer. And we'll just call this shadows. I'm going to go to my brush. And I'm going to use a nice soft pressure opacity, and make the brush kind of big. And I'm going to reduce my opacity of the whole brush to 50%. So even if I push as hard as I can, I'm not going to get any higher than 50%. And I'm going to bring this between the background layer and this one. That way, if I paint right over her foot, well, I'm using white there. Let's paint over her foot. It goes under her foot. So I don't have to be super tight about it. A little bit of that. Get some on her Libby. And since the book is casting its own shadows, I can bring that foot completely into shadow there. A little bit more there. I'm just painting it in. Darken it a little bit there. And you just have to kind of play with it till you get the angle the way you want it. So that's probably a little bit heavy. So that would now go into the opacity. I'll just reduce that down until it looks... That looks a little bit more natural. I want to look back at the original picture. I'm going to go back in the Lightroom. I wonder if I twisted their feet. It's flat on. These are like versions of the shot. Like Libby's foot looks like it's up in the air here. I'm not sure what's causing that. I feel like I had the angle pretty similar. So you can take it, if you want, take this thing, you can rotate the layer a little bit. Nah, that looks worse. So, yeah, it could be just that she just needs a little bit more light. I think the angle is slightly off. Like I'm looking a little bit more down than one of them. These are the things that, like, you're bringing it into a more of a 2D composition, that might be easier. So we'll bring in a little bit more shadow here. Definitely here. And maybe I'll make a shadow layer on top as well. So I'm just hitting that new, so that I can also shadow on them a bit. Look at the back side of the foot. And some of it looks weird because of the mask. So we'll go back in with my hard round, drop the hardness down a little bit. Oops. She really does look like she's floating there. At least that's cleaner. Is that the missing part of her shoe? Nope, that's already cleaned up. I think, did I hide her a little bit more behind? Yeah, I hid her behind the book a little bit. And maybe it's part of my shadow here. It looks like I've got a shadow under her foot, like she's floating above it. That might be an issue. I'm going to put in a mask on this layer, the shadow layer. And then I'm just going to take a black and we'll get rid of some of the shadow there. Oops, that's white. Oh yeah, see that? All that shadow underneath her foot that I brought in. Looks like you would only be casting a shadow underneath yourself if you're floating above the ground. Oops, that's not a mask. So I didn't put a mask on this one. Let's get rid of some of that. I prefer to erase things with a mask because you can bring it back just as easily as you got rid of it. Yep, that looks better. So sometimes it's just about being able to visualize what it is that you're doing. Sometimes I'm good at that, sometimes I'm not, and I have to keep messing with it until I kind of get it right. So now I'm back into the original shadow thing. And a little bit more shadow in there. Get rid of it under her foot because that's here. Let's try that one that's above. Oh, there we go. Suddenly she's not floating because there's no shadow under her. So it's not perfect. I still obviously need to fix the mask and stuff. But that's a fairly close, like, that's solid compositing now. And the basic approach is pretty good. It's figuring out where the shadows go and all that. Okay, I hope that was useful to you. If not, okay. All right, have fun.